Day 5 before lunch. A very important topic. Managing stress. So today morning you have entered into organizational system, the third part in organizational behavior. You have learned about organizational culture, organizational change and development. So already you are familiar with organizational change and you know why organizations should change. Yesterday I told you we are in a VUCA world. Our environment is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So since the environment is changing, organizations have to adapt to those changes. In management, people talk about survival of the fastest. I think in biology, you might have studied survival of the fittest, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin's famous statement was, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." Darwin talked about survival of the fittest. In management literature, we talk about survival of the fastest. You have to adopt because there are rapid changes in the environment. You have to adopt and adopt. So organizations adopt. Frequently, they change. When they change, what happens? Employees experience stress. So stress is inevitable. That is why OB ends up with stress. Okay. So this session, as you all know, stress is a vast area. My intention here in this session is to tell you something so that you understand the stress response, what happens within our body, and why should we manage stress properly. Just we try to understand why managing stress is important. So we start with defining stress, then just a look at brief history of stress concept. Walter Cannon, Hans Selye, Lazarus. There are a number of contributors, but these three contributed a lot to stress research. So we start with these three contributions. Then a model of stress. Here in OB, our focus is on occupational stress. So this model relates to occupational stress. Then finally, how to manage stress. What are the various individual approaches? What are the various organizational approaches? So this is what we are going to learn during this session. Let's start with how to define stress. Actually, there are three groups of psychologists, and these three groups define stress differently. First group of psychologists, they define stress as a stimulus. Means what? Means stress is something that occurs in the environment and places a demand upon a person. So stress is a stimulus. In psychology, stimulus is defined as an occurrence or event that produces some effect on the organism. So stress, when it is defined as a stimulus, something that occurs in the environment that places a demand on the person. Then second group of psychologists, they define stress as a response. Okay, there is a stress producing situation. How you ascribe meaning to that situation and how you respond, that is stress according to the second group of psychologists. So how you perceive a situation, there is an objective environment. How you ascribe meaning, that is how you perceive that environment and how you react to it. That is the second group of psychologists. Third group, stress as a transaction. It is a process. It includes both stimulus and response. So there is a stimulus component, something happens, and you respond in a particular manner. So stress as a transaction. So these are the three different definitions given to stress. Stress as a stimulus, as a response, and as a process or transaction. As I think you know, the third one is mostly accepted definition. Now we believe stress is a transaction. It includes both stimulus and response components. Cohen contributed a lot to stress research. And if we look at the Cohen's definition, I think he has accepted that third construct, a process in which environmental demands exceed the adaptive capacity of an organism, resulting in psychological and biological changes that may place persons at risk for disease. That is why we are very much interested in stress. There is a risk for disease. Why? We'll take up later in detail. So this is one of the most popular definition given by Cohen, stress as a process. Let us start with a brief history of stress research. Then obviously we need to start with Walter Cannon. And Walter Cannon was the one who first introduced the concept homeostasis. Probably you may remember in biology we studied homeostasis. Homeostasis is the process by which your body restores normal physiological functioning when some deviation is required. We maintain a constant body temperature, for example. So Walter Cannon, he came up with in 1932 he came up with a concept called fight or flight response. What is it? When a person perceives a threat, the body is aroused. Sympathetic nervous system and endocrine systems, endocrine glands, play a major role in this arousal. When your body is aroused, what happens? Immediately heart beats faster, blood pressure increases, blood sugar level goes up, respiration increase because we need more oxygen. It is not enough if we have glucose, we need oxygen too. So this is what happens immediately. Circulation of blood to the skin is reduced and circulation to the muscles is increased. You may have a doubt why. If more blood is directed towards the skin, if there is a cut or if there is an injury, then more blood will be lost. So circulation of blood to skin is reduced and you have to act faster. So blood to muscles increased. This particular physiological response helps an organism either to fight or flee. We run away from the situation. Either we fight or we run away. So Walter Cannon called this response as fight or flight response. So whenever we think about Walter Cannon, we should think about homeostasis and fight or flight response. So first person to contribute to stress. I think we just think about the situation. The predator is capable of running faster. The deer has to run faster than the predator to protect itself. Now what happens? What are the physiological changes? On seeing the predator, Once the stress is perceived by this animal, immediately the heart beats faster, blood supply increases to muscles, blood supply to skin reduced, respiration increase. This fight or flight response helps that animal to run faster. This response may be equally applicable to human beings also. Probably you might have heard about this person, Hans Selye. Hans Selye defined stress as a non-specific response of the body to any demand made upon it. We will come back to that later. Why he defined it as a non-specific response, not just response, but non-specific response of the body to any demand made upon it. So in the picture you find Hans Selye with his popular book, Stress Without Distress. Now you may have a doubt, what is distress? Distress is a high level of stress that only has biological consequences like heart problems, etc. The opposite is eustress. Eu in Greek means good. So even in stress, we have two types of stress, two basic types of stress: eustress, distress. Eu in Greek means good. So a certain level of stress is good. So that is eustress. When the stress level goes on increasing, after a certain period, it becomes distress. So his popular book, Stress Without Distress. He was a very intelligent person. Why he was intelligent? He was a doctor. Just I think I have to tell you something about his background. He was a doctor. So when he was a medical student, first year gone, in the second year, first till the end of the first part of the second year, they had only basic courses like anatomy, physiology, something like that. Then during the second part of the second year, he had a course on diagnosis, a subject on diagnosis. Then the professor, so Hans Selye was sitting in the class. He was a student, second year medical student. He was sitting in the class. The course was diagnosis. We know what is diagnosis. So one professor, von Jack, he came to the class, and what he did, he called his assistant and asked his assistant to bring 5 patients from the attached hospital, randomly selected patients. You bring any 5 patients from the hospital. Then assistant went and he brought 5 patients. And that professor, von Jack, he examined each one of the patient without any equipments. Just he asked questions and he got the answers from the patient. Just by asking questions and looking for specific symptoms, that professor was able to identify the disease. It was a surprise and shock for the students. Just by asking questions and looking for symptoms, he was able to identify the disease. Hans Selye was sitting. But Hans Selye observed this phenomenon. Actually, all the 5 patients, they suffered from various diseases. For example, one from cancer, one from lung disease, like that. All the 5 patients suffered from various diseases. And Selye, he had a doubt when he was second year student. Okay, they were suffering from various diseases, but all of them looked alike. They all felt sick. They wanted to lie down. They were not hungry. They were tired. So like this, Hans Selye observed certain commonalities in all these 5 patients. And he went and met the professor and he explained, what is the reason for this? They all look alike. Even though diseases vary, they all look alike. So the professor asked, so what? He said that his concept was, for example, fever. We run temperature due to number of reasons. Maybe because of malaria, it may be because of cold, or it may be because of corona. The reasons may vary, but we run temperature. When we run temperature, there are antipyretic tablets which will bring the temperature down. So can't we treat these commonalities with something? That is what Hans Selye is thinking. So he called that phenomenon as syndrome of just being sick. Syndrome, we know what is a syndrome. Syndrome of just being sick. So later he worked in McGill University. He conducted experiments on rats. Then he came up with his concept of general adaptation syndrome. Hans Selye was the one who first introduced the concept stress in life sciences, in social sciences, life sciences. So Hans Selye is considered to be the father of stress research. Stress. This is almost similar to that fight or flight response. Organism perceives the stressor, it mobilizes itself. That effort is directed by adrenal gland. We will take up later in detail. The response itself is non-specific with respect to the stressor. Why it is non-specific? I think you remember the definition he has given. Non-specific response of the body to any demand made upon it. Why it is non-specific? Because regardless of the cause of the threat, the individual responds to the same physiological pattern of reactions. Repeated or prolonged exposure to stress may produce health problems. The summer. This is what happens in us. This is how we respond to the hot climate. Winter. We shiver. So in summer, we sweat. In winter, we shiver. Regardless of the cause of the stress, the body has to restore normalcy. So body comes up with the same physiological reactions to restore normalcy. That is why Hans Selye defines stress as a non-specific response of the body to any demand made upon it. He developed this concept called the general adaptation syndrome. Stress named as general adaptation syndrome. Stress is actually an adaptive response. General adaptation syndrome. There are 3 stages in general adaptation syndrome. First stage is called the alarm reaction. And Selye calls the first part of general adaptation syndrome as alarm reaction. Your body is alarmed by the perception of threat, in simple terms. So the perception of a threatening situation results in some biological messages. So there are some physiological responses. What are the various physiological responses? Already we know the same physiological responses. Because of these physiological responses, initially the coping effectiveness may go down, but then it increases. because initially there will be a shock when you perceive a threat. Initially there will be a shock. So initially coping effectiveness goes down, but physiological responses help you to increase your coping effectiveness. So alarm reaction alarms the body, alarms the person. Resistant state. Now already the person has initiated biochemical, psychological, and behavioral mechanisms. So now resistance capacity increases. Already you are familiar with adrenaline. For example, we have a higher than normal level of adrenaline during this stage. Adrenaline helps you. So resistance state, resistance capacity increases. Exhaustion. If the stressor continues for a prolonged period, probably our adaptive capacity is finite. We do not have an infinite adaptive capacity. We have a limited capacity. So the signs of alarm reaction may reappear. If the stressor continues, the individual collapses. So these are the three stages in general adaptation syndrome. Alarm reaction, the person is alerted, alarmed, initiates number of physiological changes in the body that helps to move to the second stage, resistance, in which the coping capacity increases. Then if the stressor prolongs, then exertion follows. So you can observe this in the picture. Alarm stage, resistance, exertion. Normal level of resistance is shown. And during the alarm stage, because of the initial threat or perception of the stress, there is a shock phase, and there is one counter shock phase during the alarm stage. So Walter Cannon's fight or flight response corresponds to this alarm stage, and Selye added two more stages, resistance and exhaustion. And Selye is considered to be the father of stress. If we apply, this is not the contribution from Hans Selye, but in case if you apply Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome to a student, then this is how this will appear. There is a stressor, that is the student gets a D grade. First stage, alarm, he is alerted, she goes to the library, takes books. Then second stage, resistance, he starts preparing, she tries to cope with stress, but when the stressor prolongs, then probably she goes to the next stage, exhaustion. This may happen. I think my request is you should understand, those who have come from biology discipline, anything to do with life science may be familiar with this one. This is the physiology of stress response. When you perceive a threat, actually there are two pathways. First one, you just look at the straight line. The straight line. That is first mediator, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland. Straight line. Then second pathway, there is a deviation. From hypothalamus, we find one line saying autonomous nervous system. Then that reaches adrenal gland. So first pathway, what happens? Brain Cerebral cortex is a part of our brain. Cerebral cortex is the place where thought processes occur. Cerebral cortex. When you perceive a threat, the cerebral cortex activates hypothalamus. This hypothalamus sends a message to sympathetic nervous system. Actually, in the picture you find autonomous nervous system. It is written as autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system controls our organs like heart, lungs, blood vessels. You need not put in any conscious effort to regulate your breathing. We need not regulate our heart activity. They are regulated by our autonomous nervous system. Autonomous nervous system has two components. One is sympathetic nervous system, the other one is parasympathetic nervous system. So what happens? Cerebral cortex sends a message to hypothalamus. Hypothalamus sends a message to sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system activates adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla secretes catecholamines. Catecholamines include adrenaline and noradrenaline. Why do we have two hormones? Adrenaline helps in flight. Suddenly, if you find a snake, then you are able to jump. You are able to run faster because of high level of adrenaline. So adrenaline helps to flee. Noradrenaline, noradrenaline helps to fight. So this is one pathway. The second pathway, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus activates pituitary. You can find in the picture. Hypothalamus active PIT. It is mentioned as PIT. Hypothalamus acts as activates pituitary. Pituitary secretes ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone, ACTH. This ACTH activates adrenal cortex. So adrenal gland, we have two adrenal glands located on each of the kidneys. Adrenal gland has a middle part called adrenal medulla and the outside part is called adrenal cortex. In this case, pituitary activates adrenal cortex and adrenal cortex releases cortisol. So these are the hormones relating to stress. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. If there is a high level of these stress hormones in our body for a prolonged period, then we will develop health problems, especially heart problems.
Not audible.
Hello, sir, can you hear us?
Sir, we can hear you, but
There, I think, some net problem, I think. We can hear
yes,
you.
Paramanandam sir is having some connectivity problem. He will be joining soon.
Yeah, fine, fine.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, okay, fine.
Can you hear me? Participants, can you hear me? I think there is a technical problem.
Now, sir, you are audible.
Yes, sir. Now you are audible.
Yes, sir, audible, sir.
I'm audible. Thank you.
Yes, sir, audible.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think there is a technical problem with GoToMeeting. Okay, so Lazarus, for the first time, he talked about psychological appraisal. So this is so Lazarus, when we feel that we cannot adequately cope with the demands, then we experience stress. So it's a perception. It's a very important contribution to stress. And Selly and Walter Cannon talked about physiological stress, bodily stress, or physiological stress. Lazarus talked about psychological stress. Stress is a perception. If there is a heavy workload, then you feel stressed. It is a perception. Lazarus contributed the psychological appraisal. There is a potential stressor. Stressor can be defined as anything that places a physical or emotional demand upon a person. Anything that places a physical or emotional demand upon a person. When there is a potential stressor, the individual indulges in two appraisals. First one, primary appraisal. Second one, secondary appraisal. In the primary appraisal, what the person does, he just thinks about, is the event, that is the stressor, is the event positive, neutral, or negative in its implications? If negative, to what extent it is harmful, threatening, challenging? Primary appraisal. So now you have an idea about the stress, to what extent it is harmful, threatening, challenging. Then we indulge in secondary appraisal. We have certain abilities and resources. Are these abilities and resources sufficient to overcome that threat, challenge? So that is secondary appraisal. So his major contribution is that stress. In 1984, he came up with the conclusion that stress results from an imbalance between demands and resources. Demands may be pressures, uncertainties, responsibilities, can be anything. Demand. Resources, whatever abilities or anything that you have to resolve the demands will come under resources. So psychological appraisal is an important contribution by Lazarus. Now, a very important model, occupational stress. In OB, we are more concerned with occupational stress. I think you remember individual behavior model. In individual behavior model, I said 4 major categories of factors: environmental factors, organizational factors, personal factors, and psychological factors. Here in this model, psychological factors are included under personal factors. So there are only 3 major categories: the environmental factors, organizational factors, and personal factors are the potential stresses. A person may experience stress because of these factors. For example, under environmental factors, the expert has included economic uncertainty, political uncertainty, technological changes. Economic uncertainty, okay. Political uncertainty also Political here includes both all the three components of political environment: legislature, executive, and judiciary. Technological changes. If there are technological changes, sometimes what happens, a person may have extraordinary skills, but technological changes may make these changes obsolete. These skills are no longer required. For example, some people have expertise in manual accounting. They know the ins and outs of accounting, manual accounting. But now companies use Tally. So their skill in manual accounting becomes obsolete. That may, for example, that may create stress in those people. So environmental factors may be cause for stress. Organizational factors, for example, task demands. Suppose what demands a very high level of a particular ability, that may create stress. Task demands, role demands. Already we know under group you might have studied role. For example, role conflict, role ambiguity, role overload. Role is something to do with the expectations. There is a difference between task demands and role demands. Task demands, I have to do something, I have to perform certain task. Stress arising out of that. When you say role, it is something to do with the expectations from others. So role demands. Then interpersonal demands, maybe a lack of support. So organizational factors may be the cause for stress. Then within the person, there may be a number of problems. For example, family problems, personal problems. For example, marital relationships. Suppose divorce. That may create stress. Children, stress may arise from children. Disciplining children may be a stressor. In economic problems, finance problems, personality. Already we are familiar with personality, so personality may be a cause. Some people always look at the negative side. Some people always look at the positive side. So if you are a person who always look at the negative side, then probably a negative affectivity, right? NA, negative affectivity. You may experience a high level of stress or more stress than a person who always looks at the positive side. So these are all the potential stressors, and a person experiences stress because of this. What we should not forget is stressors are additive. That means each new stressor adds to the existing level of stress. Suppose I have family problems that create stress within me. I come to my workplace, there is suppose heavy workload that adds to the stress that already I experience. So stressors are additive. But what we should not forget is, we started OB, I told you individuals differ. There are individual differences. Why there are individual differences? Oh, your question. Why there are individual differences in the level of stress experienced? Maybe because of perception. Already I told you stress is a perception. Suppose in that class, if there are 60 students, next week examination. Next week, these students have to write examination. All the 60 students do not experience the same level of stress. Some students experience a high level of stress. Some others experience a moderate level of stress. Some others experience a low level of stress, and a few students do not experience any stress at all, because it all depends upon their perception. Suppose a student feels examinations will come and go, why should I worry about that? Perception may be the reason. Job experience. If an employee has lot of experience in that job, then probably he may experience less stress compared to a person who doesn't have any experience at all. The reason is, when a person is highly experienced in a particular job, he develops coping mechanisms. If there is stress, how to cope up with that. As we mature, as we gain experience in a particular job, we develop coping mechanisms. And social support. If you have adequate social support, probably you may experience less stress. If you do not get social support, probably you may experience a high level. Locus of control, already I told you, locus of control. We have internals and externals. Usually externals experience high level of stress than internals. Self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that I can perform a particular task. Self-efficacy. If you have self-efficacy, then you will experience less stress. If you lack self-efficacy, then you may experience a high level of stress. Hostility. Actually, in the past, in this model, in the past, authors wrote type A personality. They wrote like that. Instead of hostility, they wrote type A. Already I told you, Chicago cardiologist Rosenman and Friedman, they defined the type A as people who are aggressively involved in a chronic incessant struggle to achieve more and more in less and less time. In those days, they wrote like this, type A may be the reason, but now experts have identified it is not the whole type A, but the hostility component of type A. One of the characteristics of type A people is hostility. That hostility may be the reason different for individual differences. So these are the factors that cause individual differences in the level of stress experienced by people. Then what are the consequences? So right hand side you find 3 boxes, physiological, psychological, and behavioral symptoms. These are the consequences of distress, not eustress, right? Eustress is good stress. These are the consequences of distress. Physiological symptoms. When you experience a high level of stress, probably you may get headaches, you may develop ulcers, high blood pressure, sleep disturbances, even heart diseases. Already I told you, CHD. Then psychological symptoms. For example, anxiety, depression, decreased job satisfaction, tension, irritability, boredom, and the individual may procrastinate. Behavioral symptoms include productivity. There is a reduced productivity. There is a model we'll take up later. Absenteeism may increase. The person may leave job turnover. There may be changes in eating habits. I think you might have seen people who experience a very high level of stress. You can find some changes in their eating habits. Increased smoking or increased alcohol consumption, rapid speech, sleep disturbances. So these are the behavioral symptoms of distress. So this is a very important model. Helps us to understand the individual differences in level of experience stress. So this is the relationship between stress and performance. At the bottom, it is shown stress, two extremes, low level of stress, high level of stress, and performance, low, high. So when there is a low level of stress, performance is also low. Stress increases, performance improves up to a point. After when stress increases more and more, performance declines. How to conclude? Maybe conclude like this. Maximum performance occurs when there is an optimal level of stress. Maximum performance occurs when there is an optimum level of stress. Actually, the same relationship is applicable to conflict also. In group, you might have come across conflict. The same. This is called the inverted U. That curve, inverted U. So same is applicable for conflict. What is optimal level? It depends upon the person. That we should remember. So very important part, stress management. How to manage stress? These are the basic strategies to manage stress. Basic strategies. It means these are the possibilities you can do. First strategy, remove stressors. If something creates stress in you, remove it. For example, a noise. You are learning something. There is noise, intense noise. Remove that noise, the source from which the noise comes. Remove it. Remove the stressor. But it is not always possible. If our job is the stressor, we cannot remove it. Then what to do? Second strategy, withdraw from the stressor. You can temporarily or sometimes permanently also, you can temporarily withdraw from the stressor. For example, sometimes what we do, we take leave, 1 or 2 days leave, few days leave will help us to pop up the situation, withdraw from the stressor. That can be done. Third strategy, change your direct response to stressors. Just change how you react to stress. Suppose whenever a person experiences stress, he takes alcohol. That is his usual response. Suppose he consumes alcohol, then he should change that direct response, because probably taking alcohol will increase a person's level of stress. Some of the studies indicate like that. Some people smoke. You can find increased smoking. So that person should change that direct response to stress. Then change stress perceptions. Already we know, in most cases, stress is a perception. So change stress perceptions. Control the consequences of stress. We know what will happen when we experience stress. Already we have seen the physiology of stress. That is why I took up that topic also. Already we know the consequences. Adrenaline level increases or noradrenaline level increases. Cortisol level. Usually type A people have a higher level of cortisol during working hours. So naturally, that will affect their health. So you should try to control the consequences of. You have to relax. You have to go for relaxation techniques. Whenever we think about stress, we should think about tension. Stress is all about tension. The opposite of tension is relaxation. So we should try to frequently relax ourselves. Will help the negative consequences of stress. Whenever you get time, you try to relax yourself. It doesn't mean that you should experience some stress, then you should try to relax. No, it's not like that. Even if you don't experience any stress, just relax yourself. That relaxation will help you to counteract the negative consequences of stress. And finally, receive social support. That will help to reduce the tension. These are the various basic strategies. Okay, then managing stress, individual approach. The point is, in my department, if I experience stress, then it is my responsibility to stress. It is not the director's responsibility. It is my responsibility. I experience a high level of stress, then it is my responsibility to manage my level of stress. So we have individual approach. What we can do: time management, physical exercise, relaxation, social support. Already, I think you are all familiar with these concepts. Time management, you might have seen this matrix. I think this kind of matrices are based on one Eisenhower matrix. Eisenhower was a US president, and he developed this matrix. So we find certain tasks are urgent, others are less urgent, some are important, others are less important. So if something is important and urgent, do it first. If something is important but less urgent, it is important but not that much urgent, schedule it. Maybe you can do it later. There are some tasks which are less important but urgent. You have to do it immediately, but it's not that much important. They're less important. Just delegate. Ask someone else to do it. Maybe there are some activities, some tasks which are important. They are all time wasters. So avoid doing that. Eisenhower, if you Google, you can get that original matrix developed by US President Eisenhower, time management. What you have to do is you have to identify the activities, you have to prioritize and to schedule. Sir.
Hello, sir. Is it
Yes,
by
sir.
him? Yeah. Is it by him or is it by that Stephen Covey, where he actually come up with this in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
Yes, sir. Actually, that Eisenhower developed a method like that. Urgent, not urgent. Important, not important. Then from that, probably people might have taken. Others might have changed the way. Instead of writing urgent and less urgent at the sides, some authors write it at the top. So they change the matrix.
Actually, sir, in the book, that is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, they have used in the similar way, the way it is presented.
Oh, yes, sir.
In the
but
same way they have
basically, what
presented it.
we should do is, basically what we should do is, this matrix is okay. This helps us to understand. First of all, we should remember all the activities that we have to do.
Yes.
We should identify all the activities. Then we should prioritize. That prioritization may be based on this. Then we should schedule. Probably you might have come across on ABCD time management, ABCD. So like that. Now how time management will help, because suppose I have a lot of work to be done. If I properly manage time, then probably I'll be able to reduce my stress level. So sometimes people do not understand the connection between time management and stress management. If we properly utilize our time, then probably we can reduce our level of stress. Physical exercise. This picture is actually for students. Why they should do exercises before an exam or a test. These are the benefits. Actually, there is a theory. When you do exercise, your body secretes endorphins. Endorphin name has come from morphine. Morphine is a substance. If you take that morphine, then you feel happy. You don't experience stress. Morphine. I think people have abused that substance. Morphine. So what happens? Our body like substance. That endo means endo. That M is cut off. Endorphin. Exercise. If we do exercise, then our body secretes endorphin. That's the thing. Then these are relaxation techniques. Already, I think probably you are familiar with relaxation techniques. Very important. Like techniques like meditation, yoga. Some of the techniques we can learn and do it ourselves. After lunch, probably our clinical psychologist, he will guide you in some stress management interventions. After lunch, also you have stress support. It's better to have friends. Some people, they do not have friends, and you have to be very careful with those people. People who do not have any friend at all, isolate. In group dynamics, they call it isolate. They have a tendency to commit suicide. இப்ப என்ன செய்யறது? மறுபடியும் ஓகே, இப்போ கனெக்டட். Okay, now what are the various organizational approaches to manage stress? I have to answer that question also. Why organizations should help employees to manage stress? When I talk about individual approaches, I said If I experience stress, it is my responsibility to manage my level of stress. Suppose in our department, all the faculty members experience stress, then probably it is the responsibility of the director to help faculty members to manage their level of stress. So that is why organizational office. Now, organization organizations can do, for example, improved personnel selection and placement. When organizations recruit people, the recruitment should be rigorous. 5% here means that person has the required knowledge, skills, and abilities. Improve placement. Realistic goal setting. When you set goal, it should be realistic. Okay, முடிஞ்சது. Finished. Slide move model. Participants, any doubts and queries? I think we have some technical problems. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right now, just one sentence we heard.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
So I am highly stressed.
Time it happens now.
I'm highly stressed because of technology. Okay. Now I feel very happy. I'm able to connect you.
Sir, audio is not.
After lunch, very important.
think
You have to be very alert because our parents. Yes, madam. I don't